Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for my presentation on other desert cities. I hope you really enjoyed this play as much as I did. I thought it was an incredible play that just took a subject of truth and family feuds and other common things, which we'll get to later, and presented it in such an incredible way, especially with how dark this play was. At times, it had so many aspects of it that were hard to comprehend and hard to digest a little bit. But it had humor in it too, which I thought made the play interesting and gave it such an interesting dynamic, and made it super fun to watch. So, Robin Bates is the author of this play, and he was born on November 4th, 1961, which means he is 55. He was born into a Jewish family, which I found really interesting because in the play there is references to both the mother, Polly, and her sister, Silda, I believe is how you say her name, Silda, both being Jewish. At one point, Polly states that she is still a Texas girl at heart, and Silda says something along the lines of that she's not a Texas girl, but rather a Jewish girl who tried to get rid of her Jewishness, which I found a little bit funny, sisters poking jabs at each other. But then when I was doing research on John, I found it quite interesting that he was born into a Jewish family, and then two of the characters in the play were Jewish. It made me feel that this play was a little bit more personal to him than I originally thought it was. He also lived in Los Angeles, California, and he attended Beverly Hills High School, but he was raised in Brazil and South Africa before the family returned to California. So I found it really interesting that he actually lived where this play was set, or quite close to it. This play is in California and it's close to Beverly Hills, as Brooke explains in the play. And John attended Beverly Hills High School. So not only was he Jewish and there are Jewish characters in the play, but it also set very close to his home and where he grew up and part of his childhood, which I thought was really interesting. When I first read this play, I thought it was just another play that was kind of soap opera-ish. Like it just had a lot of drama in it for drama's sake, as opposed to there really being a purpose and meaning behind it. But that was on my initial read before I watched any clips or did any research or things like that. But when I started researching more about John and found that he actually is from this area where he said this, it gave it much more of a personal feel. Perhaps maybe his family was similar to this. Maybe they fought a lot, or maybe this is a little bit of his story in a sense. I don't know, but I found that really interesting. It gave it much more of a personal feel and like there was real purpose to it. So in an interview with PBS, they asked John why he wrote the play, and he stated, "I think it came from my sense of trying to either expiate or make sense of my life as a writer up until now, and the potential damage that I've been party to or done." And later in the same interview, he said, "In memoirs, you implicate other people in ways they can't possibly respond to. I guess I was trying to figure out what it is to be a writer and to lie at will." I found these quotes really striking when I read them, and just his explanation of why he wrote the play, because as we all know, having read it and seen clips of it, this play is about a daughter who's a writer, and writes a memoir about her family, and how that memoir is so hurtful and painful to them, and the potential that it has to really damage their family, but not give their family room to fight back and explain things from their point of view. I mean, they can talk with Brooke in the play itself, but if her memoir were to be published, everyone would kind of take Brooke at her word as opposed to what her family said. which I thought was so interesting how he alludes to the power that authors have and the power of words. Um, and for them to be able to lie at will, that's a big theme in this play, is truth and the perception of truth. And Brooke, as the writer in this play, has the power to convey truth as she sees fit, specifically about her family and what it was like losing her older brother to suicide and whose fault she thought that was, um, and how she thought that whole event played out. And it makes me wonder a little bit, especially with his comment about how damaging memoirs can be, to other people, and his comment about um, what sort of folly or potential damage he's been part of, up until this point, or what damage he's caused by his writing. I thought that was really interesting. So it made me wonder if this play is sort of a memoir in and of itself of him and his process of writing in his life, and maybe the damage that it has caused, or the potential damage that it has to cause. So it was just an interesting concept to explore further. So a little bit about the characters. Lyman Weath, he is the father, and he's also a politician. And in the play, he's extremely loving towards his daughter and his son, both Brooke and Trip. However, as a politician, we get this idea, especially from Brooke's mother, Polly, that there's this certain moral standard to uphold, especially in public, and there's this certain image that must be presented as a way to save face, sort of, in public, which of course would be any politician's family. As we know, it's spread all throughout the news if anyone in politics messes up at all. So there's this underlying idea throughout the play, simply in Lyman being a politician, that conveyed that the family must save face and must present themselves in some sort of way. And then we see how that plays out a little bit with their children, with Polly and Trip, and Henry, who committed suicide but didn't commit suicide in the play, as you all know, and what that was like for them, and then maybe why it lays into a little bit of why they have some of the problems that they do. But that just added a whole nother level to the play that was quite interesting, especially for the children. And then there's Polly Weath, who's the mother, and she's a former Hollywood screenwriter. And Polly is interesting. I really struggled with Polly's character for quite a while because I found her very unkind and ungenerous and unloving. However, the more I explored her character, the more I found she's extremely firm and stern and authoritative, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It comes off across as quite bad and as quite unforgiving and not understanding. However, I think her sternness and her authoritativeness and her just being so firm in who she is and what she believes just comes off from loving her family as deep as she does. And we find that she really just wants to protect her family, which I think is really interesting. She's a very protective mother, in a sense. She doesn't want Brooke's memoir to come back and haunt Brooke or the rest of the family. She's quite protective. And then Brooke Weath is the daughter, and she's the main sort of character in the play. She is also a writer, and she's the one who is writing the memoir. And Brooke is really mourning her brother throughout this entire process, and mourning the suicide of her brother, and she's quite depressed, and we get the sense that she blames her parents for what happened. And as she's writing this whole memoir, we find that she's always missing a little something. Something doesn't quite connect, especially when we explore their characters deeper, because both Lyman and Polly deeply love their children. However, and you can especially tell that in Lyman and just the way he interacts with both Polly and Brooke, that he really deeply, or with Brooke and Trip, that he really deeply loves them both. And so it doesn't quite make sense for Lyman to react to Henry the way that he did, and for that to cause Henry to commit suicide. So there's always this little bit of a disconnect, which we find out later at the end of the play as to why that is. And then there's Trip Weath, and he is Polly and Lyman's son, and he is a TV producer. And Trip is very much so the peacekeeper in the family. Everyone kind of looks to him to see what he thinks he's like the final vote. He's the one that decides if something is okay or if it's not okay. And I don't think he asked for that role, because often throughout the play we get this sense that he thinks everyone's a little wrong, and his whole family is a little bit crazy and off the rocker a bit, and not quite hitting the mark right in what they think and what they do, but he loves them nonetheless. And then we have Silda Grumman, who is Polly's sister, and she's an interesting character as well. Each of these characters are so profound in each of their roles and have very distinct characteristics. But she's a little bit crazy. She's a little bit of a pot stirrer, especially with Brooke, as she helps Brooke write this memoir that she's writing. And she has had problems with drug and alcohol in the past, and she doesn't get along super well with Polly. So all of these characters, just in how strong they are and who they are, led to there being huge conflict in the play, which we obviously see. Some prominent themes that we see in the play are truth and the perception of truth, the idea of war, family conflict, depression, and outward appearance, the idea of saving face and having to present yourself in a certain way. The theme that stood out to me the most was the one of truth and the perception of truth, which is exactly why John wrote this play, is that writers have the ability to lie at will. And in this whole play, as Brooke is writing her memoir and showing it to her family for the first time, it's not that she's lying in her memoir, she just doesn't quite understand. But in her not understanding, there is a lie, which is just confusing in and of itself. But then later, when she finds out, she understands that there's this back part of truth that she doesn't understand from her family. She cannot understand what she didn't know. And she did not take her family's word, her parents especially, both Polly and Lyman, at their word that there's things that she's missing that she doesn't understand. But each of these characters has their own perception of truth as they go throughout this play, and what they think actually happened to Henry and what it's like, and especially because both Polly and Lyman were keeping a secret from the whole family. And so at the end of this play, there's this moment when the entire family figures out what actually happened to Henry and what truth really is, and their perceptions of it all shift as they find out another fact. It's not that they're all the same now, they're just shift to be more on the same page. And that idea of truth, and that truth is in the eye of the beholder, and each person has their own perception of truth, is quite prominent throughout the whole play. So here are just some discussion questions to think about as you read the play again or watch it maybe. What do you think the author wants us to know? What theme or idea stuck out to you the most and why? What made you uncomfortable in this play? What character did you find most compelling? And what character did you find most relatable? So I certainly hope you enjoyed this play as much as I did and found it as interesting and compelling as I did, and all of its twists and turns. And I certainly hope that I get to watch it someday, and I hope you loved it as well. So thank you.